afternoon, this evening. I was putting some finishing touches on this presentation, and I ended up going back and adding in a lot more detail, and I didn't end up finishing it in time. So part of this presentation is going to be me finishing the presentation. After this is all done, I intend on having this up and available on GitHub, probably as a gist file with lots of links and things, so people can refer to it after and get all kinds of, I don't know, find the information you need and whatever. So let me just send a shout out real quick to everybody, let them all know that I am live, and if anybody has any questions, obviously I'm not going to be paying too much attention to the Discord or the Telegram as I'm doing this, but feel free to drop it in the chat here. I'm going to try and let everybody know on the Superalgos community Discords and Telegrams that everything is good to go and we are live. So let's see here. Sorry, trying to find my window and make sure I let everybody know what's going on. Let's see. Oh, I didn't want to click on that. I wanted to copy link. Open that up here. And now I want to all right. All right. Let's now you can see everything that I have open. So link. And Telegram. All right. So let's get started. I'll fill in all the rest later. So this is meant to be a introduction to running Superalgos trading bot, algorithmic trading, yada yada yada, cryptocurrency, all those buzzwords using Docker. And also to start us off, tonight I am drinking a Neshaminy Creek, local Pennsylvania brewery, Punkless Dunkel, because why not drink a heavy alcohol, extremely sweet beer after dinner right before going to bed. And it's fall, you know, time for all the pumpkin-y things. Highly recommend it. Neshaminy Creek is an excellent brewery. Check them out if you can find them. So anyway, back to Docker and Superalgos. This is going to be split up into two parts. I'm going to do a quick start first, so everybody who doesn't want to do a deep dive and figure out details on why we chose Docker, why we did different things with the Docker file, etc., can just dip out and go on their merry way running Superalgos and Docker. But stick around if you want to learn a little bit more about Docker itself, why different things are done, best practices, a lot of work on keeping it secure and making the container small, things like that. That will be closer to the end. And then obviously any questions that you may have, I'll try and get to them as they come up. I've been trying to spend a lot of time in the support channels, helping people out, figure things out. But a lot of these things you really just need to do it yourself. Figure out what isn't working, what you're not understanding, ask questions, and maybe jump in on a live session like this and have someone like me walk you through it if it's possible. I obviously don't have all the answers, but I can at least try and get you up to my level as best as possible. So what is Docker? Docker is one way to run containers. There's several other ways to do it. Containers themselves are very similar to, well, they have similarities to virtual machines, and they have similarities to things like FreeBSD jails and things like that. The idea is trying to secure a process into a single environment and run many processes on a server. Chrome takes advantage of this by putting things in sandboxes. There's many other apps that do this. And Docker is one of them. It makes it very easy to reproduce and distribute software and keep it all as one tight-knit, immutable environment. So if you download a Docker container that has a specific signature file, you know that you can send that to your friend and they get the exact same environment, exact same dependencies, exact same code, and they can run it themselves, hopefully exactly the same as you are. Doing software deploys, it makes it very easy to make sure that what you're testing locally on your development machine is the same or as close as possible the same to what will actually be deployed out into production. Superalgos doesn't have necessarily a production environment, but you're going to make that yourself. And this is probably where I should mention that the Docker deployments really are only intended to be used as a production type deployment. Because of some of the factors that we're going to talk about later. But the one thing that I keep seeing in the support channels is that Git is not installed in the Docker container. And the Git history and all of the .git folder is not included in the container itself too. Part of that is security. Part of that is to keep the container as small as possible. And part of that is the immutability of the container. You're not supposed to be changing the code inside of it. The state may change. There may be temporary files and things like that. But the code itself, the code base, should be the same. And when you stop a container and start it back up again, it should be exactly the same as it was. If you're changing the code, you end up stopping a container, and when it starts back up, it's going to go back to where it was. It's not going to keep any of the changes that you made. So you shouldn't be relying on any changes that you made in the container while it was running. So anyway, um, let's see. Let's move on to installation. If you're running on Mac OS or Windows, you're gonna very easily follow the directions to get Docker Desktop installed. I prefer to run on Linux myself. So I have a Linux server up and running. Let me just make sure that I have stopped all the processes that are running on here. Let me hop in on a different server real quick. I I wanted to try and have a brand new fresh server waiting for this, but I did not coordinate that in time. So we're going to use one of my Odroid cluster servers to do this. And let me jump in here. I'm gonna, all right, everything is done. Let me stop everything running here real quick. And cool. All right, so if I didn't already have all these things installed, I would have to go ahead and install these. So these are what are called dependencies. If you aren't up to date, I'm assuming if you're running Linux, you understand what these things are. But I know that there are a lot of people coming into this project that have a lot more of a financial background and a lot more trading experience and not necessarily system administration or software development experience. So I'm going to try as best as I can to cater to everybody. Obviously, if you're running Linux, again, you're gonna have to know a lot more about what's going on than if you're running Windows or whatever, because I don't know. It's just kind of the way it is. You run Linux, you just kind of understand more of what's going on. Hashtag don't hate. I don't know. What do you want to do? So anyway, let's I'll just go back out to my main directory here. Home directory. If you're wondering, yes, I am running oh my zish, ZSH, whatever you want to call it. We're gonna do an sudo apt-get update. Another thing that came up in the channel today that I noticed, somebody was complaining about lack of login information, lack of security. It's true. Superalgos right now has no authentication method. It is intended to be run on a local secure network. You should not be exposing this out to the internet. If you want to run it in AWS or something like that, you should firewall it off, security group it off as much as possible, run in its own VPC, and either SSH tunnel into it or VPN into the network to be able to access it. I did try to get an Nginx reverse proxy up in front of it, but there's a couple of issues where the front end still needs to connect to the node port and not necessarily just the front end port to be able to talk to all the different nodes in the cluster, or at least the backend process. So right now it's not quite ready for that. It definitely needs to be a little bit more work put into the front end, but for now the front end is totally serviceable and works. So a couple of other more important things are getting development time at the moment, like the governance system and the docs and machine learning, things like that. So anyway, we updated. We want to make sure we have our requirements. Pretty sure I already have all these. Oh, I didn't have libcurl installed. Oh, and CA certificates. Did not know that. Well, there you go. So this should happen pretty quickly. Excellent. We want to make sure that we have our GPG keys to validate the packages that we're downloading. Oh, I always do that. Again, I run, I already have it installed. So, I mean, you can literally just copy and paste these. I believe I took these directly out of the documentation. So, the Docker documentation is extremely good. Go ahead and use it. Oh yeah. See, I did set this up for Raspberry Pi, or if you're me, I'm running ARM64. These Odroid boards are ARM64. So make sure you pull out the correct architecture or arch here. There are many other examples in the Docker documentation. But I can cat my Etsy apt conf.d docker. No, what am I looking for? Sources, duh. Docker. So I have my focal download Docker, Linux, Ubuntu. So then you just need to make sure you have your Docker things installed. And hopefully this doesn't mess me up, because I should have these already installed. Yep. So, boom. Another thing to check, make sure that you yourself are in the Docker group. My Docker group is 998, and I'm there. If you aren't in the Docker group, you'll want to run user mod, did I put that command in here? I thought I put that command in here. Here, sudo user mod -g docker -a -g docker. But I'm already in the group, so I am good to go. We can check that Docker is running. Cool. And then we can Docker ps -a. And I thought I took that down. Did I take that down on a different server? Hopefully not. Let me just double check this again. Why is it saying that there's no I don't know. All right, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and kill this real quick. Yeah, I don't get it. It says it's right in here. Docker RM. Cool. So now we have no Docker containers running. So one thing we can do is Docker pull. Did I do that? I did not show doing that. If you don't already have the Docker container pulled, it will, running Docker run will pull it automatically for you. Let's go ahead. Let's see. I built a new Docker container today. So I am going to pull the latest. And this may mess me up, but whatever. I'm doing this for all of you. And again, I'm sorry for the crappy green screen and settings behind me. I hope you can see everything that's going on. Oh, didn't realize my window's been in the way the entire time. My body has been in the way of the window the entire time. Not looking at my window placement here. So these containers are quite large. Mostly it is because of the code base itself. And I'll probably talk about that a little bit later as well. But it takes a while to download. So grab a beer, grab a coffee, come back. Especially if you're running on a slower Raspberry Pi, Odroid, other single board computer. Running on a larger AMD 64 Intel computer probably would be a lot quicker. For some reason, the motherboard that I picked out to build this gaming computer, which is what I'm streaming on, when I tried to enable Docker on Windows and the Windows subsystem for Linux, I had to turn on virtualization, which ended up disabling a bunch of USB ports on the back of the motherboard. No idea why. Turned it back off. Boom. USB ports work. So, I cannot run Docker on my desktop for some reason. But luckily I've got lots and lots of little servers to play with. Anyway, we're done. So now we can do a little test run here. We'll just quickly Docker run --rm and then the name of the repo and the tag latest. Boom. And cool. That's what you want to see. Superalgos platform is running. It also lists the ports here that you need to do. This HTTP interface is the port that you will connect to get the full front end. I'm gonna Control C to get out of this. Hopefully. Maybe. Maybe not. Anybody? Bueller? What's going on here? I should be able to Control C to exit. I don't know why that's happening. If you run into the same problem, you can open up a new session and Docker stop. Oh man, I keep trying to Control V to paste. because I'm used to working on my Mac during the day where you Command V everything instead of right clicking to do everything. All right, and boom. So that's one way to kill it. And I'll exit out of that. What are we gonna do next? Hopefully, well, I guess I'll have to research this a little bit more, but Control C should have exited. So that basic command is not how you want to actually run Superalgos. That was just a demo. And now we're gonna add in a couple of extra options to make it much more usable. We're gonna add in -d, -d, make it run in the background. We're gonna add in -p and add some ports. These WebSocket and HTTP interface ports. Sorry, I think the 9% alcohol in this beer is getting to me. -v, -v to add in some local volume mounts. These will persist data for, if you look down here, our data storage, log files, workspaces. And then a name, gives it a friendly name instead of trying to find the hash. You may have noticed. Well, I don't have it in history right now. But Docker itself assigns a short hash as an ID to every container. And if you don't assign this -- name when you're running it, then Docker will come up with a random name for the container. But it's much easier if you know what you're running to just give it a name, and then you can say, hey, I can refer to it as Superalgos. So when I want to check the logs, I want to stop it, start it, restart it, whatever. Just use Superalgos instead of trying to find the hash or the random name that it gives it. So, I already have my workspaces here, but one thing that we need to do first is make the data mine log files and MySpaces work directories. And as you can see, they're all owned by me. Splat, splat, splat. And then you can use your Docker command to run the container. Run in the background. RM means remove it when we exit. The name Superalgos, the 2 ports, the data volumes that we want to persist our data to, and the container name, the repository that we're pulling it from. GHCR is the GitHub container repository, and the tag we're going to run is latest. So let's do it. And here's the random container ID hash that I was talking about. The name, Superalgos. You can see the ports that we have mapped. And 34,248, sorry. These ones with the colons in front of them are IPv6. The ones with the zeros are IPv4. And you can see the status, we're up and running. The command that's running is node platform, node browser, which is the default entry point that we have when we build the container. And then we can also check the logs, Docker logs, Superalgos. Boom. And that's exactly what we saw when we ran it in the foreground. Now, let's go ahead and connect to it. 2.3, I think I'm on 2.3.3, 3.4.2.4.8, right? Yep. That was kind of cool. Brave just popped up an ad saying that they're looking for people. If you're a developer looking for a job, go ahead, check out Brave. They may need you. So anyway, here's our stuff. So I'm going to, I don't want to totally exit this right now, but I don't want to, whatever. I'll just go to, I'll go to github.com, good old GitHub. I'll just leave it there. Oh, that's right. I was going to try and show that there is a, it didn't show up for me. But anyway, you may see an error. It'll look something like error git not installed. And again, that is totally intentional. The main way, the originally intended way of running the application is git cloning the repository from GitHub and then using either the internal, I call them training wheels, the internal commands. They have like app.update, they have app.contribute, I don't know. But anyway, they have commands built into the documentation system in the UI for people who are not as experienced with Git and development to easily contribute documentation updates and things like that. And it uses Git behind the scenes. You'll see errors about Git. Again, the Docker container is not intended to be used with Git, changing the code base, things like that. So Git is not included. The Git history folder is not included. You'll see an error saying that Git is not included or not installed. 100% intended. You can ignore it when you're running in Docker. If you're running on your desktop, you should have Git installed, and if you get that error, you should go find the Git download page and install Git. Anyway, moving along. We did load up our front end. If you're running it local, like if I was running it on this Windows PC, I would go to localhost 34248, but I was running it on a remote server, so I went to the IP 34248. But now we can, oh, sorry. Oh, I was showing you how to update it. You can stop it because we don't need to run it anymore. I think there's a Docker kill command too. I generally do not use that, but you can see we put in the RM. So Docker stop removes it. Excuse me. Now when you want to update, you'll do Docker pull, and then you can stop and run it. If you try to, using these command line Docker commands, if you try and run a container with the same name twice, it will tell you there is already one running. If you try and run a container and map the same ports, you'll get an error saying that it cannot map the same ports. So that's why you'll have to stop the first one first and then run it again. Oh, and I had a spelling error. But now we're going to talk about Docker Compose, which is my preferred way of configuring and running Docker containers locally. And I have a link here to the main Docker command line documentation if you want to check out more about the CLI. So Docker Compose. Docker Compose is more or less a wrapper for all the CLI commands. I guess you could also say it's an implementation of the Docker API. So a lot of the commands, the subcommands, are very similar to what you would see when you're just running Docker. But you get the added benefit of being able to use this Docker Compose YAML to keep all your configuration. So let's check this out. And let's go to the main project page here. I'm going to change over to the develop branch, and we store it in the Docker folder, and we have a sample Docker Compose file for you to start with. The reason that some of these things are in here, like the 2 dots in front of the volumes, the 2 dots in front of for the context, and then specifying the Docker file as .docker file, is so that one, for development purposes, when I'm doing updates, etc., where anybody else is contributing, you're most likely going to have the entire code base pulled down. You may or may not have these data storage log files, MySpace, workspaces already present from other development tasks that you're doing, other testing, whatever, but they will get created right in the base directory of the project. So this is trying to reuse those exact same directories. So you'll get the same experience whether you're running directly off the command line using the node commands, or if you're hopping into this Docker directory and running Docker Compose commands. Another thing that you'll see here that we did not, and I guess I can increase this a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see on the video. We have a command added in here, and it's just min memo. Something to highlight is that in the Docker file, we have an entry point. And this is a detail that you may not need to know, but just a little for people who, I guess, want to learn a little bit more about Docker, why things are, how this is laid out. The entry point takes precedence, and this is the main command that will run whenever the container is started. The command then gets added onto the end of that entry point as an extra option. So executing this Docker Compose file will run node platform, no browser, min memo. It will pull the latest container. If it doesn't already have a container pulled down, it will build it from the local code, which is great for development purposes, so I can test the code. If I'm doing this myself, I can test the code before I make my commits and push them up. And then it will tag that build with this repo and tag. These environment variables down here, the PUID and PGID, these are meant to try and map the internal Superalgos user to the external host-based user for permissions on the host. Make sure that the files can be written and read, and if you want to delete them, things like that. You don't have to necessarily be root to be able to do it. And then we have this restart, which we didn't have before. So if something happens and the container fails for some reason, Docker will restart it on its own. Whereas kicking it off with the Docker CLI commands, that won't happen. As you can see, this is really set up for development. Again, I had the build information in here. I had these 2 dots instead of a single dot, or I don't know. I'm not referencing them a different way. Again, fully because this Docker file right now is intended to be run with a full git clone of the repository. So if you only want to use the Docker Compose for production-like deployments, you can make a couple of small changes to it. So here on my local system, I've removed the build information, left the main image so it pulls from the same source up on GitHub. Left the command because I want to run with min memo, which is minimum memory. These Odroid boards have, I can't remember. I want to say, like 4 gigs of memory. And I think that's what some of the I guess the Raspberry Pi 4s, you can buy up to 8, maybe 16 gigs of RAM. But 4 gigs is a pretty round number. System works really well with 4 gigs. Anything less is a little dicey, but you can still run the system with less than 4 gigs. I'm running it on some older Odroid boards, the C2s, which only have 2 gigs of RAM. Just means that you have to do less. So you have to modify your trading system a little bit, your strategy, to make sure that you aren't using up too much memory. All right, so let me get back into this Docker Compose. I'm still using these environment variables. My local user is ID 1000, so this works out perfect for me. I'm using a single dot here for my data storage, log files, and workspaces because these directories are in the exact same directory where I'm running this from. And again, I want to restart on failure. So save that. And now we can run Docker Compose up. I'm not going to do -d. I have a plugin on my Z shell that it's kind of like predictive type. It looks back through my Git history essentially and tries to assume what I'm going to type, and I can hit over the right arrow if I want to accept. Doesn't really show up as dim here in PuTTY, but in iTerm 2 on Mac, sorry, it does show up a little bit dimmer, so you can tell that it's not something that you've actually typed. But anyway, I'm going to do Docker Compose up, which will act very similar to the original Docker run command that we did. You can see now, since I had min memory, I'm only using 512 megabytes of RAM available for Superalgos. I got the options min memo and no browser. So on my ports, and I can see that my app is running. You can see we get some extra output here on the side saying this is all from the Superalgos 1 container, which is kind of cool. I can hit Control C again to gracefully stop it. And here are the commands to pull down that Docker Compose file if you want to just grab it on its own. without pulling down the entire code base. So cool. We went through all those extras. I edit with Vim, so I put in a couple commands. I know some people, when they get started with VI or Vim, they don't know how to exit. So hopefully you read these docs and you can learn how to exit properly. Docker compose up, we did. And then you can also Docker compose up -d, and it will run it in the background. So if you want to check on the status, Docker compose PS. Boom. You can see we have the ports again. Everything's mapped. We have our state is up. We can see our command. And you can see the name is relatively human readable. It kind of pulls this first directory name, Superalgos, and then the second Superalgos comes from the services right here. Under services, we have our first service as Superalgos, and that's how we get the Superalgos 1 and the second part of the Superalgos here. So if I want to stop it, I can Docker compose down. Oh, I guess another thing I could have shown is you can Docker compose logs. To view the logs, you can Docker compose pull. To update. Oh, not sure if you guys heard that, but somebody just dropped something in on the floor up above me. It was super loud. Do Docker compose up -d again, just to show you. You can do Docker compose logs. You can -f to follow, and you can do -tail with a number to only pull down or only display a certain number of logs. If you've been running this for days, you'll have thousands of lines of logs. And just running Docker logs will display all of them, which may bring your system to its knees. So sometimes it's good to remember you only want to tail a couple lines. And in this case, it's just the last 50. And I'm following it. So as new things come up, like, let's see, I can whoops, I put in 2 colons. And of course, Google wants to try to search for everything. And hey, my one of my other nodes placed a Dogecoin buy just a couple minutes ago. That's pretty cool. So yeah, we have our system here. I can edit this. Let's see, I want to expand. Oops, I added in an extra node. Let's delete that. Edit 192.168.1.233. And I'll save it. And then I'll reload. And then At some point, we'll see some other logs come up here. Okay, well, I don't know. Let's start some data. Let's get some data. I'll configure this from, let's just do like the last month. I'll just do 9/1/2021. And see what logs we get. Am I on the right host? Huh. What am I doing here? Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm not on the right host. Let's stop this. um, Too many nodes, man. Too many nodes. All right, so that's done. Stop the process. Let's reload and load up the correct server. That illustrates an interesting point, though, that you can install multiple nodes. You can make one a front end only node, and you can make one like a data mining only node or a testing only node or whatever else you want to do. All right, so now let's do our Docker Compose logs, tail. There you go, error, get not installed. But again, we do not care about that because we are running an immutable container. And when we start our data extraction, data mining, we should see the process start warming up here any minute now. Huh. Oh, right. I need to put in the correct IP here so it connects to the right host. Oops, I didn't save. Wrong button. Man, this 9% beer. You don't think it's doing anything, then all of a sudden you start doing silly things like typing words wrong, not hitting save. Don't sysadmin while drunk, my friends. So, yep, we're right back here. And you can see we're all red, telling you that there's a problem. 237. Save it this time. And now refresh. So something that other people always hop into the channel and ask is, hey, is anybody actually using this? Is anybody making money off of this? Does it work? Yes. Code works. Am I making money off of it? No, not really. I mean, I'm playing around with like 20, $50 at a time because I hate gambling. I don't want to lose my money. But I think this is really interesting and I'm learning a lot about the stock market and things like that. Why did this not save? Do I have my directory permissions wrong? Probably. Aha. Data storage, not data mine. Okay. That's a typo that I need to update. Data storage. Okay, well, it's correct here. So if you have a problem, what is my workspaces doing? Data storage. So I want to sudo chown -r splat everything. So now my data storage is owned by me. You can see again. Oh, I'm 1001 on the server. All right, so let's chown. 1000. And I want to, oh, here, I'll show you another cool thing. So you can sudo whack whack. Boom. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. In the newer version of the Odroid operating system that gets shipped, they install an Odroid user, whereas they used to not. So half of the nodes that I'm running, I am UID 1000. Half of them, I am not. And I have not consolidated that config between the different systems. Anyway, now I believe I should be able to save. And I may have to restart the container. Yeah. All right, so one of the things I need to fix was this. Oh, I have data storage here. I have data storage here. But here, I do not. So, yeah. All right, let me close that. Let me, oh, and I put in aliases for all of these because I type them so frequently. Docker compose down. Docker compose up. Oh, I wanted -d, but whatever. We'll look at the log as it's coming through. And now I will reload my website. So anyway, that's what we're saying. Does this make money? Sure. What if you put in a trading system, a strategy that makes money, then yeah, you can make money with it. This is just a tool that lets you pull in data, run some commands against it to detect if you want to buy or sell, and then it runs API commands against whatever exchange you want to place those buy and sell orders at whatever targets you want them to be. So it's entirely up to you if it makes money or not. The data mining totally works. Pulls down data from an exchange, from your exchange. I have personally tested Binance, Kraken, and Coinbase Pro. All of them pull data. They had different caveats, and they all work in slightly different ways, but they do all pull down data for you to act against and graph and chart, compute different indicators, and then you can build up your strategy to be whatever you want. If the indicator you want is not in the system already, you can add it. Hopefully you contribute it back so other people can use it too. And what am I doing here? 237. So now I should be able to save, and then I should be able to reload. Oh, and now I'm getting permission denied again. Huh. All right. So this is the fun of doing a live demo. I'm not sure why I'm getting permission denied. Workspaces. Anyway, let's see. I'm gonna stop this for now because, whoops. That's basically it for the getting started quick start. It wasn't very quick, but yeah, that pretty much used up an entire hour. That should be totally fine. Why does that not work? Anyway, I will figure that out another time. I can remove the data mine directory because that does nothing. That was a typo. I don't know. All right, I'll figure that out another time. I'll post an update. So anyway, we went through how to use Docker, how to install Docker, how to use Docker on the command line, how to use Docker Compose. And now is the fun part of going through the Docker best practices. So, most of this was intended to answer the questions of why Git is not installed in the container. I kind of already walked through that, but again, there are Docker maintains a couple of lists of best practices in their own documentation. A lot of it is aimed at keeping everything simple, making it easily maintainable, easy to read, easy to understand, keeping things small so they download and deploy quickly. Not installing a lot of cruft. Again, keeping it small, keeping it secure, keeping it fast and light. Installing Git in a Docker container is generally something that you don't want to do in a production environment. You want the code to stay pristine, immutable, exactly as it was in that snapshot in time. Especially if you are deploying this to a deploying this to a production environment. If you run into a bug, you want to be able to know exactly what happened, why this container version 1, acts different than container version 2. If you are modifying the code inside of the container, you'll never really know what version you're actually running at the time. So, we have this copy dot to dot, copies the local directory, all of the code base into /app, because that's our work dir. We're using an Alpine container to keep everything as small as possible. Alpine itself is a Linux distribution that is aimed at being very minimal. I make mention of a couple of other, there are very minimal Debian containers out there. If you, at one point, I guess up until yesterday, the day before, this container was using Python Slim as the base. And that was a decision I made a couple of weeks ago, or I guess a couple of months ago, because I noticed that we were installing TensorFlow. I thought it would be easier to install, run with a Python base and install Node on top of it to make sure that TensorFlow, which is a Python project, worked properly. Even though it does have Node.js packages, it looked to me when I was installing them, and I really haven't explored it that much, so I'm not 100% sure, but it looked to me like the Node.js packages were just a wrapper for the Python. But in moving to the Python Slim, it was a little bit of a larger container because it was a Debian release. But in my day-to-day life, I've noticed that working with Python, the Slim containers work a little bit better. There are certain packages when you get into working with things like NumPy, Pandas, that if you were trying to use an Alpine container, you can't get the WHL pre-built binary packages for them. It will rebuild those packages at build time. So the build gets exponentially larger due to those packages being built from source as opposed to installing binaries. And in general, that Python Slim container, at least in comparison to with Superalgos itself, the Python Slim container only adds like a couple of megabytes. It may even be 100 megabytes as opposed to the Alpine-based one. But when you're running Superalgos and you have 2 gigabytes, that 100 megabytes or so doesn't really matter. But anyway, another contributor wanted to change over to Alpine again. I was already putting in an effort to try and minimize the container size, and I was playing around with it also. I definitely prefer to run Alpine when I can, and so we are now back on the Alpine container. Another thing you'll notice is that we have all these run commands all combined into one. This is mainly for minimizing the number of layers and also utilizing the build cache. Build cache during CI/CD may or may not be beneficial, but definitely if you are a developer, you're building this container over and over locally, having as few layers as possible and utilizing that build cache drastically improves build times. And so if you run a linter like Hatolint, or just look through those Docker best practices, and just, searching around the web, seeing what other people are doing, everybody will tell you that this is the way to go. Trying to minimize the layers, utilize the build cache, speeds things up, keeps things small. A security feature we're running as non-root Superalgos user. Using Superalgos as the username is a little bit of a vanity thing, but definitely don't want to run as root as much as possible, especially if people are putting their API keys and dealing with money. Again, we are right now, you should not be exposing this out to the internet, but if something were to happen, running as root is never a good idea. Can definitely give an attacker more access to things that they're not supposed to if they can somehow break out of the application, get into the container. If they're only running as an underprivileged user, they can't get very far in terms of going out to your other infrastructure. These two, obviously just exposing the ports that we need, setting up the volumes that we need to persist data. And the entry point, just saying, we're running in a headless environment. We definitely don't need a browser. Node platform is definitely the command that we need. So looking through the Docker best practices, you'll find that a lot of these things, we are taking advantage of a lot of the best practices that they recommend. One of them that you'll see a lot of other people using is multi-step or two-stage builds. I did a lot of testing with Superalgos, and honestly, with the node dependencies, I was not able to make a two-stage build actually make any difference in terms of size. So when I made this commit today, I decided to just keep it as a single build. We aren't putting in any environment variables. We aren't putting any secrets in. All of the data storage, like my workspace, log files, data storage, those directories are all ignored, both in the GitHub ignore and in the Docker ignore. So we're not passing in any locally stored information. So the multi-stage build really didn't get us a whole lot in terms of both security or size. So it was just kind of left out for now. Let's see, what else? That's kind of it for the Docker specific best practices that they mention in their documentation. So next thing I was going to talk about is a 12-factor app, which Superalgos is not itself. But there are a lot of things that kind of dictate what to do with Docker, how to implement Docker, how to run things in Docker that are it's really worth taking a look through this, especially if you are a developer working with a web app that, you and your employer are deploying. It also explains some of the things that we are doing and some of the best practices that are in the Docker documentation. Also explains some of the things that if you're just looking around at Stack Overflow, searching through Google, medium.com, all the different blog posts that people are doing. This will help explain why certain things are architected the way that they are. And I've started trying to go through, and this is where I got caught up right before starting this live stream, explaining how some of these factors are implemented in Superalgos and why certain things are not, and why they don't necessarily apply at the moment. So let's look. We'll quickly go through them. And I just wanted to write something down here real quick. So this is a very cool website. It was, I guess it's a little bit old at this point, but it's good information. It definitely helps, and it definitely lends itself a lot to Docker. I'll let you go through these pages on your own, but just to kind of quickly touch on them, they talk about everything from development through deployment, through monitoring, and I guess they don't really talk about alerting at all. But as a sysadmin, I am definitely 100% on board with CI/CD, testing, failing early, failing often, monitoring all the way through the deployment process, including continuously in prod, testing all the way through, including continuously in prod, and alerting. Trying to set up as many business facing, I guess kind of user facing alerts as much as possible. Things like returning 500s and slow response times. Those are kind of the examples that I always fall back to. So 12 factors. We want to keep a single code base in version control, which is GitHub for most of these projects, especially for Superalgos. Keeping a list of explicitly declared dependencies. NPM is what GitHub uses. It's a Node project, Node.js. NPM makes it very easy. There's a package.js that you'll see in the repository and a package.lock to lock in all the different versions. And then you can do an NPM update. But that's really, if you're using a modern tool like Node.js, you get that built in. Ruby has a really good system built in also. Python has pip, and tracking all the dependencies can be done in many, many ways. There's pyenv and a whole bunch of other things, but there isn't really a full standard for Python. One of the most annoying things about Python. But if you're doing something other than JavaScript, Ruby, Python, find out the best way to track and pin versions so that they can be packaged, tracked, updated when needed, but keeps everything reproducible. The config being stored in the environment. So usually I take this to mean everything should be defined as environment variables when you're running a Docker container. So as you're deploying through staging, UAT prod, all you have to do is change saying like, okay, instead of using the prod database, instead of using the staging database credentials, we're now using the prod database credentials. It's not built into the container. It's changed as the environment changes. Backing services as attached resources. This is kind of what Superalgos does. There's the front end web app, and then there's the web port, the web socket, which is kind of like the backend service. And they talk to each other over a TCP port. That's kind of what you want to be doing. Like you run your web app, it talks to a database over a TCP port, talks to Redis over a TCP port, talks to an external API over a TCP port. Build, run, release, talking about CI/CD, which Superalgos kind of has CI set up. It runs GitHub Actions to test and build a container. But for Superalgos, there's no real release and run because there's no real production environment. It's just whatever you yourself run. Processes. A single process per container. Stateless. Superalgos is kind of stateless. We do need to mount those data directories to persist data. Stopping and starting the container using the exact same data directories will essentially act like a stateless application. Eventually, I could see the front end and the back end applications being split out into different containers. Potentially, you could run them on different hosts or run them on the same host, update them separately, scale them separately. But that's basically what that's talking about. Port bindings. Again, Superalgos does this where there's two ports. There's the web port and the web socket port, the front end and the back end port. Those are the two that we're exposing and that we bind to. Concurrency, scaling out via the process model, not necessarily something related to Superalgos, but read more into that if you're working on a different web app. But Superalgos can scale. You can run more than one node. You can run multiple on the same host if you really want to, but you'd have to change the port. And again, right now the front end isn't really separate from the back end. So it's not like you could run one front end and have it just asynchronously put different calls into different backends to have the same response or have the same result from the request. Superalgos doesn't necessarily start up very quickly. It doesn't shut down very quickly, but it does do a graceful shutdown. So part of that is in Docker using those entry point and the command arguments. You want to try and have your application be the actually executed thing in the container. I've run into a lot of different containers being deployed to production where the container itself has something like supervisor running inside of it, which I guess used to be a very standard design strategy. But when you're looking at this 12-factor app, you could have a case where your application fails to shut down. It just gets hammered and doesn't do the actual graceful shutdown. It could be a time when the application itself stops running and supervisor doesn't catch it, doesn't restart it properly. And everything to Docker seems like it's still running properly because it's checking supervisor. Supervisor says it's running, but your application actually isn't. I don't know. I guess that there's some other discussion in the Docker documentation where they talk about running your main application as ID 0. Again, I think it's mainly in terms of that graceful shutdown, fast startup, where if, for example, Superalgos crashes it's definitely going to cause the container to stop. And it's definitely going to tell Docker, in our case with Docker Compose, where we were telling it to restart, Docker will then restart it. It will know that it stopped and do the right thing. Dev prod parity, again, that's that immutable portion of it where what I build locally on my machine, I know is what is going to be built when my pull request is merged into the main project. And I know that that's the same, more or less the exact same container that's going to be built by the CI system at the end of the day. And when I go to pull it later on my production system, I'm going to get the exact same chunk of code and dependencies and everything. Logs, treating logs as event streams. So this to me usually means running in Docker, I want to output all my logs to standard out. I want to use the Docker system, subsystem, to then distribute the logs to where I need them to go. By default, locally, that means they're going to be stored in a JSON file or a flat file locally on the file system. But Docker has a bunch of different logging plugins like FluentD, Gelf, a couple of others. So if you are running in a different production system, a different application, maybe Superalgos in the future, but you could centralize your logs, ship them through FluentD, FluentBit, and ship them up to, I don't know, Elasticsearch, and view them in Kibana, something like that. Then admin processes. These to me are like running database migrations, startup, teardown operations, things that don't necessarily need to be run at the startup of every single container. And Superalgos doesn't really have any of these, but again, just mentioning it in case you are looking at developing your own app, or you are working at a company that is developing an app and you want to deploy them in Docker, come check this out. There's another extension of this called Beyond the 12-Factor app, where, let's see, I'll take this one. I think this is the one that I want, the link. So this guy, a couple years after the original 12 factors were released, he kind of went back through these and revised them a little bit and added in a couple of extras. So maybe worth, and so here's where telemetry, which is the monitoring and alerting, comes in. Authentication and authorization comes in. If you're looking to run a Docker application, looking to deploy one on the web for real, hundreds of thousands of users, check this stuff out. Think I'm good to call it a night. I didn't see any questions come through. Doesn't necessarily look like anybody's watching. But anyway, feel free to join me in the Superalgos Telegram or Discord channels. I'll be back next week. Gonna keep doing these every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time. I'm not sure if I'll have anything as structured as I did tonight, but anyway, hope you learned a little bit. If you have any questions, look me up, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Find me on, yes, I do have Epic Games. This is my gaming system. This was 100% built as a gaming rig before COVID. And now it is 100% a streaming rig. I got the green screen as a joke gift in my Christmas white elephant, whatever it is. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna use this. But yeah, this has been my home for the last year and a half. Everybody's been at home. Oh, nice new follower. Good to see you. I'm gonna totally butcher your name, Pyanthak. Hopefully that was close. Um, yeah, gaming rigs are the best production machines. Yeah, this has totally turned into, because it's so freaking fast. It only has 16 gigs of RAM. But it's so much faster than any other machine I have in my house. It's definitely been my development machine, and definitely my strategy development machine, so I can quickly backtest and iterate going through different random ideas that I have. It's been really good for myself to learn what all the different indicators do, and also what all the different parts of the trading system actually mean. Because I came into this knowing absolutely nothing about trading systems, what an open and close was, what stop loss meant, manage, take profit. Yeah, I had no idea. I had to learn all this stuff. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Yep, totally came in with absolutely no trading experience at all. Like I said, I'm a system administrator, part-time developer, or want to be a developer, whatever you want to say. DevOps guy, SRE. Um, been into crypto for a while. I mined Dogecoin back in 2011 when it first came out. Um, I've had a Coinbase account for forever, but I just never really used it. And then I finally was in lockdown, and I was like, you know what? I should actually learn to code a trading bot. I was like, it can't be that hard to buy low, sell high. And so I started looking around, and actually, what got me into Superalgos was I saw a post in the Raspberry Pi subreddit, and I was like, boom, I've got a Kubernetes cluster running on basically Raspberry Pis in my basement that's doing absolutely nothing. I had migrated most of the things that I was running on it off. A couple of the other projects that I started running on it, like shoot, what's the name of it? It's like Home Advisor, not Home Advisor, Home Assistant. Um, for running smart lights and switches and things like that. Just kind of stopped using it. And so I was like, what else can I do with this Kubernetes cluster? And lo and behold, like the next day or soon after, found Superalgos. And I was like, oh, of course, there's other people smarter than me already solving this problem, writing a bot that you can cluster and have it run on multiple systems, trading multiple markets, multiple coins, and it works with a whole bunch of different exchanges. So yeah, of course, very first thing I came into the support channel asking was, how do I get Coinbase working? And everybody was like, yeah, we don't use Coinbase. We only use Binance. So first thing I did was figure out how to get Coinbase working. Actually, that's probably not true. I think I saw a lot of questions about how to get Docker working, and I was like, well, that's what I do for my day job. I can totally add Docker into this thing. And then I got Coinbase working, because it definitely took a while to figure out what I was looking at in the code base, how to actually figure out what was going wrong connecting to the exchange. And Rest is history. It took me. Thanks. I'm glad you like it. Um, I want to say I played around before I actually started trading anything live. I think I played around with the system for like 6 months, trying to figure out what everything meant and how to actually use it and how to get the clustering to work properly, or at least to the way that I wanted it to work. And I still iterate on it weekly or monthly or whenever I get around to it. Yeah, it's really interesting to me. That's why I've started doing these videos. I want other people to learn from my experience and not fall into the same holes that I did. So hopefully I can help somebody and maybe make some money along the way. Who knows? But anyway, it's getting a little late. I've got little kiddos that got to get up in the morning and work and all that. So I'm going to call it a night. I think I already kind of pumped all the Superalgos stuff. Find it on GitHub. Find them on Twitter. We have a Telegram channel. We have a Discord channel. And yeah, like and subscribe. Find me on YouTube. Follow me here on Twitch. And that's it. Good night, everybody. See ya.